My mom wrote, "We're cutting all ties, don't come around ever again." My sister reacted with a heart. I replied, "I'll pull my name from all loans tomorrow." By midnight, the chat was full of shouting in all caps. I didn't respond to a single one. I want to be precise about who I am before I tell you what I did, because the details matter. I am a CPA. I have been a CPA for 11 years. I work in forensic accounting, which is a specialty most people have never heard of until they need it. Forensic accountants are the people companies hire when they think someone is stealing from them. We are the people attorneys hire when a divorce involves hidden assets. We are the people the government calls when a business looks profitable on paper, but no one can explain where the money actually went. My entire professional life is built around one skill: finding the number that does not belong. Finding the transaction that looks legitimate until you put it next to every other transaction, and suddenly the pattern becomes undeniable. I have spent 11 years being very, very good at that. I tell you this not to brag. I tell you this because my family forgot it, or maybe they never believed it applied to them. People have a remarkable ability to assume that the rules of the world do not extend into their living room. My parents raised me. They watched me study for the CPA exam at their kitchen table. They came to my firm's holiday party 3 years in a row and told everyone within earshot that their daughter was the smartest person in the building. And then they tried to steal from me anyway. That is the part I still turn over sometimes, late at night when the apartment is quiet. Not the betrayal itself, the certainty they must have felt, the absolute confidence that I would not look, that I would be too grateful, too loyal, too afraid of losing them to ever actually open the books and do my job. They were wrong, but I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Claudia. I am 34 years old. I grew up in a mid-sized city in the South, the older of 2 daughters. My parents, Roy and Deb, spent most of my childhood working service jobs and talking about the business they were going to start one day. My dad had worked in construction since he was 19, mostly as a laborer and later as a foreman. He had a good eye for property. He could walk through a house that looked like a wreck and see exactly what it would take to make it sellable. My mom was the talker, the closer, the one who could sit across a table from a nervous seller and make them feel like they were doing the right thing. Together, they had genuine instincts for the business. What they had never developed was the discipline to run one. My sister Bria is 3 years younger than me. She is beautiful in the way that has always made rooms shift when she walks in, the kind of pretty that translates to attention, and attention to confidence, and confidence to a certain kind of entitlement that nobody in our family ever had the nerve to name out loud. Bria did not go to college. She tried 2 semesters at a community college and then pivoted to what she called content creation, which mostly meant posting her life online and accumulating followers the way other people accumulate debt. She was not without talent. She had taste, a good camera eye, the kind of personality that reads as warmth through a screen even when it is not warmth in a room. But she had never paid a bill in her life that my parents did not either cover directly or subsidize quietly. By the time she was 28, she had a curated life and a negative net worth and 2 parents who would have given her both kidneys without being asked. I loved Bria. That is important to say. I am not telling this story as someone who resented her sister. I loved her in the way you love someone you have known your whole life, someone whose habits are so familiar they are almost part of your own body. I knew which side of the bed she slept on and how she took her coffee and the exact face she made when she was about to lie about something small. I knew her, and part of knowing her was knowing that she had never been asked to carry weight, and so she had never learned how. That was not her fault. It was a failure of parenting, and I had made peace with it a long time before any of this started. The ask came on a Sunday in October 3 years ago. My parents drove to my apartment, which they almost never did. They are not the drop-in type. My mom called ahead, said they needed to talk about something, used the tone she reserves for serious occasions, the quiet, careful one without the usual southern warmth layered on top. I made coffee. We sat at my kitchen table, the one I had bought with my first real paycheck, and my dad laid out the plan. They had found 2 properties, a duplex in a transitional neighborhood 12 minutes from downtown, and a ranch house on a half-acre lot that the estate was selling as is after the owner died. Both were deeply undervalued. Both needed significant work. The duplex needed a new roof, kitchen gutting, all new electrical on the 2nd floor. The ranch house needed foundation repair, a full HVAC replacement, and cosmetic work throughout. My dad had walked both properties with a contractor he trusted. He had numbers. He had a renovation timeline. He had comparable sales going back 18 months that suggested strong margins on both if they could execute cleanly. What he did not have was the financing to move on them. His credit had taken hits over the years, a few late payments during a slow stretch, a card that went to collections briefly before they caught it and paid it off. His score was not catastrophic, but it was not bankable, not for a commercial line of credit large enough to cover acquisition and renovation on 2 properties simultaneously. My mom's was slightly better, but not enough to move the needle. They had talked to 3 banks. All 3 had said the same thing. They needed a co-signer. They needed me. My dad did not frame it as desperation. He is not built for that. He framed it as an opportunity, a chance for me to have equity in something real, to be part of building something the family could pass down. He used the word legacy 3 times in the first 10 minutes. My mom was quieter than usual, which meant she had coached herself to let him make the case without interrupting. When he finished, she reached across the table and put her hand over mine and said that they would never ask if they did not believe in this completely. I asked the questions I was trained to ask. What was the draw schedule? What were the exit timelines on each property? What happened if the renovation ran over budget? My dad had answers for most of them, reasonable answers, the kind that suggested he had actually thought this through rather than just believing hard enough. I asked to see the contractor's estimates. He had them in a folder in the car. He went and got them. I read them at my kitchen table while my parents sat quietly across across from me, and I will tell you honestly that the numbers were not bad. There was real margin in both properties if the work came in on time and the market held. I said I would think about it. I thought about it for 2 weeks. I pulled comparable sales myself and ran my own numbers. I called a real estate attorney I knew from a case and asked her hypothetically what she would look for in a co-signer agreement. I drafted a list of conditions: quarterly financial reviews, access to all business accounts, co-signatory approval required on any draw over $5,000, a formal operating agreement spelling out my role. When I brought these conditions back to my parents, my dad accepted every single one without argument. My mom cried again, the grateful kind, and said she knew I would come through. I signed for $180,000. For the first several months, it was fine. The duplex renovations started on schedule. My dad was on site nearly every day. The contractor they had hired was solid, the kind of tradesman who texts you photos at the end of every workday so you can see exactly where the money went. I set up a shared accounting system, a cloud-based platform that gave me real-time visibility into every transaction. My parents found it mildly inconvenient and told me so, which I ignored. I reconciled the books every other weekend. I sat at my kitchen table on Saturday mornings with my laptop and a second cup of coffee and went through every line item the way I go through every file at work, looking for the thing that does not fit. In those early months, nothing did not fit. The ranch house was slower. The foundation repair turned out to be more extensive than the initial estimate, which is not unusual. Old houses hide things. They brought me the revised contractor quote in month 3, and it was $11,000 over budget. I approved the additional draw after reviewing the documentation. I was not happy about it, but it was a legitimate cost, supported by an engineering report and a revised scope of work. I signed off and moved on. What I noticed in month 4 was small, a line item in the expense ledger I did not recognize. Consulting fees paid to a vendor listed as Harlow Advisory Group. The amount was $4,200. I looked for a corresponding contract in the shared files. There was none. I looked for an invoice. There was none. I sent my dad a message asking about it. He replied that evening and said it was a design consultant they had brought in to help stage the duplex for listing photos, that he had paid it in a hurry before the invoice was processed formally, that he would upload the paperwork the following week. The following week came and went. No paperwork appeared. I sent a follow-up. My dad said he would get it from the consultant and send it along. I made a note and kept going. Month 5 brought a second Harlow Advisory Group payment, $6,800 this time, labeled Site Management. I flagged it in my notes and sent another message. My dad said the consultant had expanded their scope to help coordinate the subcontractor schedule on the ranch house. He said the invoice was coming. I said I needed it before I could close out the month's reconciliation. The invoice never came. The third payment hit in month 6, $5,100, label Design Retainer. By this point, I had stopped asking my parents about it and started doing what I was trained to do. I searched the state's online business registry for Harlow Advisory Group, LLC. It was registered in the state 11 months prior. The registered agent was listed as Deborah, my mother's full first name, with a home address I recognized as my parents' house. I looked at the articles of organization. The business was structured as a pass-through entity attached to a trust. The trust was named the Bria Lynn Future Trust. The listed beneficiary was my sister. I sat very still for a long time after I read that. Then I closed the browser, opened a new spreadsheet, and started building the documentation file. Here is what I want you to understand about the next 18 months, because I think it is the part people find hardest to believe. I did not confront them. I did not say anything. I did not ask my dad to explain or give my mom the chance to cry her way into a justification. I kept showing up to reconcile the books every other weekend. I kept answering their calls. I approved legitimate draws and asked appropriate questions about cost overruns, and I sat at my kitchen table on Saturday mornings with my coffee, and I watched the Harlow Advisory Group payments continue with the calm, systematic attention of someone who is building a case, because that is exactly what I was doing. I want to be honest about why I waited. It was not weakness. It was not fear of losing them, though I will not pretend that played no role at all. Mostly it was professionalism. In forensic accounting, you do not move until you have the complete picture. You do not confront a subject with partial evidence. You wait until the pattern is complete enough to be undeniable, until you have documented enough transactions that there is no innocent explanation left standing. Moving early tips off the subject and gives them time to restructure, to transfer assets, to create paper trails that muddy the record. You wait, you document, you build until what you have is airtight. So I waited, I documented, I built. Over the 18 months following that first Harlow payment, $62,000 moved from the business accounts into the Shell LLC. The amounts varied, never round numbers, never consistent month to month, the exact signature of someone who has read enough about financial fraud to know which patterns draw attention. Always just under reporting thresholds. Always labeled with language vague enough to be defensible in isolation. What made it damning was the timing. I cross-referenced every single transfer against the loan draw schedule, and every single transfer from the business account into Harlow Advisory Group occurred within 14 days of a draw from the commercial line of credit. They were drawing on my credit, extracting the cash into the shell company, and letting the business account sit deleted until the next draw. They were not running a renovation business. They were running a pass-through operation with a plan to eventually fold the main business under bankruptcy, leaving the $62,000 sitting clean inside a trust my sister would inherit while I held the bag for $180,000 of commercial debt. I found the bankruptcy research in month 16. My dad had left a browser tab open on the shared accounting laptop, the one we used for the business platform. He had been reading about Chapter 7 business business bankruptcy, specifically about asset exemptions and what a trustee could and could not reach in a pass-through trust arrangement. He had bookmarked 2 articles. He had a notes document open in the same window with handwritten questions he had typed out, the kind of questions you ask when you are planning something and want to understand the mechanics before you commit. One of the questions read, if the LLC was set up more than a year before the filing, does the trustee have less reach? I photographed the screen with my personal phone. I added it to the file. By the time I finished building the documentation package, it ran to 47 pages. Bank statements with transfer lines highlighted, the LLC registration, the trust documents I had pulled from the county recorder's office, which are public record, the articles of organization, the tax filings for the business, which I had access to because I had prepared them, where the Harlow payments had been deducted as legitimate business expenses, which meant they had also been using the payments to reduce the business's taxable income while simultaneously moving the money into a protected account. The browser screenshot. Every email and text message in which my dad had promised to provide documentation for Harlow that never materialized. I organized it chronologically. I wrote a 6-page summary memo at the front explaining the scheme in plain language, the kind you write when you know the document is going to be read by people who are not accountants. I have written 100 of those memos for clients over the years. I had never written one about my own parents before. I sent the full package to the bank's fraud investigation unit on a Thursday morning, 8 days before my mother sent that text. I sent it as a secure encrypted upload to the commercial lending fraud tip line, the formal channel, the one that triggers an automatic hold on the associated account pending review. I attached a cover letter on my firm's letterhead identifying myself as the guarantor on the account and a licensed CPA, and I explained in 2 paragraphs exactly what the documentation showed. Then I closed my laptop and went to a client meeting. I want you to sit with that for a moment. I submitted the fraud report on a Thursday. My mother's text came the following Tuesday. For 8 days, I knew exactly what I had done, and I went to work, and I reconciled other people's books, and I answered emails, and I had dinner with my boyfriend Marcus on Friday night, and watched a movie on Saturday, and went to the farmer's market on Sunday morning, and I did not say a word to anyone. Not Marcus, not my closest friend, not my therapist, nobody. Because in this work, you learn that the case is not over until it is over, and you do not talk about cases while they are open. The Tuesday text came while I was at my desk after lunch. My mom's name appeared on my phone, and I assumed it was a call, which it was not. It was a message. We're cutting all ties. Don't come around ever again. I read it 3 times. I sat with it for approximately 90 seconds. Then I opened the bank's online portal and navigated to the commercial line of credit account and selected freeze account. A confirmation window appeared. I clicked yes. I navigated to the guarantor section and initiated formal removal of my name from the account, citing the text message as documentation of voluntary severance of the business relationship, and I uploaded the screenshot directly to the removal request. Then I drafted 1 email to the private lender my parents had mentioned in passing over the previous few weeks, the hard money lender they were so excited about, the one they believed was going to free them from the inconvenience of my oversight. I did not know the lender's specific contact information, but I had the firm name from a document that had come through the shared accounting platform, and their website had a general inquiry form with an email address. The subject line of my email was 4 words, notice of guarantor withdrawal. The body of the email was 2 sentences. I am the guarantor on commercial line of credit account ending in the last 4 digits, which I have frozen and from which I have initiated formal removal of my guarantee as of today's date. Please see attached bank confirmation. I attached the confirmation PDF and hit send. I did not explain why. I did not apologize. I did not offer to discuss it. Then I went back to the spreadsheet I had been working on before my mother's text arrived, and I finished what I had been doing. I want to talk about the choice to be quiet, because I think it is the part of this that people find most difficult to understand. When people are hurt, when they feel betrayed, the instinct is to explain, to make the other person understand what they did, to lay out the evidence of your own pain and wait for them to acknowledge it. I had done that in my life before, with other people, in other situations, and it had never worked the way I hoped. What I had learned from 11 years of professional experience was something simpler and harder. The people who are willing to defraud you are not going to be persuaded by your feelings. They are going to listen to you and calculate whether they can manage you. They are going to cry or rage or apologize or stonewall, depending on which response is most likely to get you to back down. Engaging with them gives them information. It gives them time. It gives them the opportunity to move money, destroy records, call their own attorney, or simply wear you down until you doubt yourself. So I did not engage. I did not argue. I did not confront. I did not send a long, carefully composed message explaining how hurt I was and asking for an explanation. I filed the report. I froze the account. I sent the lender notice, and I let the machinery of the financial system do what it does. On Thursday, 2 days after my mother's text, the private lender ran a standard credit check as part of their due diligence on my parents' loan application. What they found was a commercial account that had been active on Monday and was frozen with a fraud hold and an active investigation attached to it by Thursday. What they did not find was the guarantor, because my name had been formally removed. What they also found, because fraud investigations of this nature are flagged in ways that show up in commercial credit inquiries, was a case number attached to the account suggesting financial misconduct under active review. The deal collapsed on Thursday afternoon. I know this because at 4:47 p.m. my phone began doing something it had not done in years. My father called 3 times in a row. When I did not answer, he switched to texts. Then my mother called. Then both of them from a number I did not recognize. recognize, probably a neighbor's phone, then my sister. By 6 p.m., I had 31 missed calls and 47 text messages across 3 different numbers, and my work email had 2 messages from an address I did not recognize that turned out to be a new account my mother had created that afternoon. I read none of the texts. I listened to none of the voicemails. I read the subject lines of the emails, which said urgent and please, and then, in a third one sent at 8 p.m., you have destroyed this family. I did not open any of them. My sister posted a video at 7:30 that evening. I know because a friend texted me a screenshot. Bria was in her car, which she always uses for emotional videos because the lighting from the windshield is flattering and the enclosed space creates a sense of intimacy. She was crying in that photogenic way she has always had, tears tracking cleanly without disturbing her makeup, her voice soft and cracked in a way that sounds like bravery rather than hysteria. She said, without naming me, that someone in her family had made a choice out of jealousy and bitterness that was going to hurt everyone, that she had always tried to be the bigger person, that she forgave this person but she needed her followers to know she was going through something hard. The comments filled with exactly the sympathy she wanted, hundreds of them within the hour. Stay strong, queen. Jealousy is a disease. Cutting off toxic family is self-care. She posted 3 more videos over the next 2 days, each one slightly more specific without ever being specific enough to be held accountable for anything. I watched all of them without feeling much. What I noticed professionally was that she was creating a public record of a narrative before the facts became public, which is a thing people do when they know the facts are going to be bad for them. By Friday morning, my firm's receptionist had flagged 2 calls that came in for me from a blocked number, both before 9 a.m., both identifying the caller as my mother and describing the situation as a medical emergency. I asked the receptionist to note the calls and hold them. There was no medical emergency. What there was a fraud hold on a commercial account, a lender who had walked away from a deal, and the beginning of what was going to be a very unpleasant conversation with the bank's fraud investigation team. That conversation happened the following Monday, not with my parents, with me. The investigator assigned to the case called my direct line and introduced herself and thanked me for the documentation I had submitted, which she described as thorough. She asked me several clarifying questions about the nature of my relationship to the account, my role as guarantor, the business arrangement with my parents, and the timeline of the Harlow Advisory Group payments. I answered every question precisely and referred her to the relevant pages of the documentation package for each one. The call lasted 40 minutes. At the end of it, she told me she could not share investigative details, but that my formal removal from the account as guarantor had been processed and confirmed, and that I would be formally notified of any actions affecting the account in my capacity as a former guarantor. That was the last time anyone official has spoken to me about it directly. What I know from subsequent events is this. The fraud hold on the account was converted to a formal investigative freeze approximately 6 days after my report. My parents received a certified letter from the bank notifying them of the freeze and requesting documentation to support the business expenses claimed on the account. I know this because my dad called Marcus, who we had met twice and barely knew, and left a voicemail asking him to please talk to me and make me understand what I had done to them. Marcus played the voicemail for me. I listened to it once. My dad's voice in the voicemail was not angry. It was the other thing, the deflated thing, the sound of a man who has been confident for a long time and has just run out of ground to stand on. He said they were good people who made some mistakes and that this was not what it looked like, and that I had taken something small and turned it into something catastrophic, and that he hoped I understood what I had cost this family. I thought about that word. Small. $62,000 moved into a shell company, registered to my mother with my sister as beneficiary, timed precisely against draws from a line of credit secured by my name and my financial standing. A bankruptcy plan researched and partially outlined in a document he left open on a shared computer. 18 months of payments labeled with intentionally vague descriptions and supported by invoices that never existed. The word he chose for that was small. I did not call him back. The duplex sold 4 months after all of this happened. The sale came together mostly because the renovation had been completed before the account was frozen, and the property was legitimately improved and genuinely sellable. The net proceeds after the mortgage payoff were enough to cover a portion of the outstanding balance on the commercial line of credit. The ranch house has not sold. As of the last public record I checked, it is still listed, the price reduced twice, sitting on a market that has softened considerably since my parents began the project. The outstanding balance on the commercial line is my parents' obligation entirely. My name is gone. My credit was reviewed by the bank during the guarantor removal process and cleared without damage, which is standard when removal is initiated due to documented bad faith dealing by the primary borrowers. The ranch house is worth talking about separately because it is where the plan broke down before the plan was supposed to break down. My parents had bought the ranch house as the second property, the one the estate was selling as is. The foundation repair took 4 months instead of the projected 6 weeks. This was not manipulation. It was genuinely what old houses do when you start opening their walls. The contractor found load-bearing issues that the initial inspection had not caught, which required an engineer, which required permits, which added delays. I reviewed every change order. All of it was legitimate. All of it was real work on a real property. But the delays mattered because delays mean carrying costs, and carrying costs on a loan of this size are not trivial. The plan, as my dad had originally laid it out, was to sell the duplex and roll the margin into the ranch house renovation to reduce the draw on the line of credit for the second phase. The duplex sold later than projected. The ranch house ran over on both timeline and budget. The margin from the duplex sale sale was supposed to cover the gap, except that $22,000 of it went to Harlow Advisory Group within 6 weeks of the sale closing. So by the time my parents found the private lender, the ranch house renovation was stalled at about 70% completion. They did not have enough left on the line of credit to finish it. They needed a new source of capital. The hard money lender was offering a bridge loan against the projected value of the finished property, which was not an unreasonable structure in principle, except that the entire premise of their creditworthiness rested on a commercial account that I had already reported to the bank's fraud unit. I think about this sometimes. If they had not gotten greedy with the duplex proceeds, if they had rolled the margin back into the business the way the plan required, if the $22,000 had gone into finishing the ranch house instead of into Harlow Advisory Group, the property might have sold by now. They might have cleared the line of credit. They might have had a legitimate business with a clean record and a real second chapter. They are smart people. My dad genuinely understands property. My mom is genuinely good at selling. The business was not doomed by incompetence. It was doomed by the choice they made to turn it into something else. I do not think they intended it to get this complicated. I do not think they sat down one evening and drew up a detailed plan for defrauding me from the start. I think it started smaller. A transfer here to give Bria some breathing room. A slightly vague label on an expense to make it less visible. A quiet structure to protect some of the proceeds from the inevitable chaos of a business that runs close to the edge. I think they told themselves it was temporary, that they would put it back, that they were just being smart about protecting the family's future. I think the plan grew and hardened over time, the way these things do, until it was no longer something they were doing, but something they were committed to and could not easily undo without confessing what they had already done. None of this is an excuse. I understand the mechanism without excusing the choice. What I know is that every transfer to Harlow Advisory Group was a choice. Every vague label was a choice. Every Sunday dinner where they sat across from me and answered my accounting questions and looked me in the eye was a choice. People make choices under pressure, and the choices reveal what they are actually made of, not the story they tell about themselves on good days. What they were made of, under pressure, was the willingness to let me carry the weight of their mistake while routing the benefit to my sister. That is not something I can unknow. My sister has not reached out to me directly. She continued posting for about 3 weeks after the collapse, the vague emotional content gradually fading as it became clear that whatever was happening in the family was not going to resolve itself quickly or cleanly. Her follower count dipped slightly and then stabilized. Life goes on for people like her because there is always a new story to tell, and the previous one fades in the scroll. My parents have tried to reach me through 4 different channels since I blocked their numbers. 2 of the attempts came through relatives I am still in contact with. An aunt on my dad's side who called me genuinely confused and distressed, and to whom I said only that there was a legal matter I could not discuss, and that I was fine, and I hoped she was well. One attempt came through a former neighbor who said my mother had called her out of the blue and asked her to pass along a message that they wanted to talk. The most recent attempt came through a letter, an actual physical letter, mailed to my apartment. I recognized my mother's handwriting on the envelope. I did not open it. I photographed it and added it to the documentation file, and then set it aside. I am not proud of that in the way people expect me to be. I do not feel victorious. What I feel most of the time is something closer to the feeling you have after a very long illness, that exhausted, clear-headed relief of someone who has finally stopped running a fever. There is grief in it. I want to be honest about that. I grew up in a house with those people. I know how my dad sounds when he laughs at something genuinely funny, not the performance laugh, but the real one, the one that comes from somewhere low in his chest. I know my mother's handwriting on that envelope because I know her handwriting from every birthday card she ever sent me. Grief is not the same as regret. I do not regret what I did, but I am not without grief, and I think anyone who says they feel nothing after something like this is either lying or has done it before. Marcus asked me once a few weeks after everything collapsed whether I had known from the beginning, whether I had signed the loan already suspecting something was wrong. I told him the truth, which is that I did not. I signed because the business case was reasonable, and because I love my parents, and because there is a version of the world where people are mostly who you believe them to be, and for a long time I wanted to live in that version. The first Harlow payment shattered something, and I cannot tell you exactly what, only that once it shattered, I could see clearly in a way I had not been able to see before, and what I saw looked exactly like what it was. My parents thought they knew their daughter. They knew the one who showed up, the one who stayed late and fixed their mistakes and covered their shortfalls and signed her name to their dreams without asking for enough in return. They knew the one who loved them past the point where love was wise. They did not know the other one, the one who goes to work every day and opens files and looks for the thing that does not belong. They forgot that she is the same person. The bank's fraud investigation is still open as of the last notification I received. These things move slowly. I do not follow it closely. I filed what I had and I let the process work, and I have gone back to my life, which is quieter than it was and lighter in a way I am still getting used to. Marcus and I went to the coast for a long weekend last month, the first real trip we had taken in 2 years, and I sat on the balcony of our rental on the second evening with a glass of wine and the sound of the water below, and I did not check my email once. I thought about the Thursday morning I submitted that report, how steady my hands were, how little I hesitated. I thought about my dad in his closer suit telling the loan officer that I was the brains of the operation. He said it the way people say things they believe completely, with warmth and pride and not a shadow of irony. He was right, as it turned out. He just did not consider what that meant. The all caps in that group chat faded by 2 a.m. I know because I checked the timestamps the next morning out of a kind of clinical maniacal curiosity. 47 messages over 6 hours, the volume peaking around 10 p.m. and dropping off as they ran out of things to say to a person who was not answering. The last message was from my mother at 1:58 in the morning. I did not read it then. I deleted the thread a few days later without reading it at all. Whatever it said, it was too late. The report had been filed 8 days before she sent the first word. By the time they started shouting, the case was already open, the account was already frozen, and the lender was already gone. They thought they were negotiating with me that night. They thought the caps lock was pressure I would eventually crack under. They were typing into a room that had been empty for over a week.